Hello and welcome to Temporal, part of the Ahval News Online podcast series. I am Yavuz Baydar, editor of Ahval. As the major independent online news outlet, in the forefront of all news and free commentary about Turkey, with focus on its current affairs, Ahval regularly cooperates with London-based Center of Turkish Studies, CEFTUS, in relation to Labour Party annual conferences regularly and presentations also at Westminster. The latest such activity took place on September 24 in Brighton, where the Labour delegates had convened under rather tumultuous circumstances due to the Supreme Court ruling and developments on Brexit. Our subject in the side event was again on Turkey, titled Discontent at Home, Misadventure Abroad, Turkey's Dual Crisis. We had opportunity to discuss various aspects of recent issues with some experts. Tensions over Syria and gas in the Eastern Mediterranean threaten to permanently damage relations with the country's traditional Western allies. Meanwhile, a crackdown continues on academics and journalists and intellectuals with profound effects on the institutions that once provided a limited degree of free speech. And a brain drain is taking place also as a consequence of oppression. And domestically, we observe a country, Turkey, under severe social and political duress, with its rule of law nearly collapsed. To analyze these issues, how they are interlinked, and what might be coming next, it was former Foreign Minister of Turkey, Yasar Yakis, and Chair in Contemporary Turkish Studies, European Institute, London School of Economics, Political Science, Professor Esra Ozyurek, and Yannis Koutsomitis, Managing Editor of Athens-based Kappa News Online, and myself, Yavuz Baydar. Here is the entire discussion.
Thank you, Ala. Thank you all for joining us for this session. And we'll, I think, keep limited introductions and presentations, which we will leave some room for Q&A at the end of our panel. Again, welcome. This is a second joint panel with Ahval News Online and CEFTUS, Center for Turkish Studies. We were in Liverpool last year, again touching subjects linked with Turkey. But this one is interesting because this is a meeting under extraordinary circumstances with political ground, under Great Britain is shattered, and not a bit of this turmoil is a surprise to any of us gathered around this table, because we have the experience and memory. All the elements of global disorder has been in place for some time. As a signal flares in Turkey, sort of a pioneering country for disorder, which of course is in a much deeper uncertainty these days for more or less in the last decade, I would say, past 7 years or so. And more so, the uncertainty, I think, due to severe mismanagement of President Erdogan, brought in the past 3 years, I would say, that evolved into an urgent crisis, a multi-layered one, a systemic crisis, so to speak. And we have been, as journalists, following this with intense care and attention, because it's a wonderful minefield and a gold mine for journalists, although it has very dark, shady parts. Turkey's entire administrative system is now crackling. Its foreign policy is in shambles. Social tensions are increasing. It's sort of a powder keg, in a way, lately. And as does the oppression. Its rule of law is nearly demolished, toothless, all against the background of the deepening economic crisis, of course, which is the main factor for all the decline, demise that we are observing. Darker clouds, as if the current ones are not enough, are ahead in the coming months. I have almost no good news for you, except tiny ones, maybe some sort of flickers that may show flickers at the end of the tunnel, not the light. I think is the correct description from my point of view. This overall situation in the country is bleak, and this promises us to be optimistic. A lot of patience, I think. Well, what has been happening? On the downside, which is a very large area, a depressing chain of events keep going on, continuing. Unchanged is the state of the oppressed and the streams of opposition scattered. Human rights are severely bruised. According to the latest Human Rights Watch data, nearly 50,000 people are held in prisons as detained or sentenced on absurd accusations, most of them, backed by utterly problematic indictments, and they are easily defined as political prisoners. Largest bulk of these belong to the grassroots of the Gülen movement, whose leader Fethullah Gülen is seen by the authorities as the mastermind behind the botched coup 3 years ago. About 35,000 of them are behind bars of the Gülen movement, according to, again, HRW. The rest, about 10,000, are Kurds, linked with the third largest party in parliament, elected party in parliament, and the rest, some tiny groups belonging to the leftist movements, extreme leftist movements. This data per se places Turkey, which is still a negotiator with the European Union for membership, on top of the regimes that hold largest bulk of, again, political prisoners, which is a sort of an oxymoron. The overall capacity of the Turkish prisons are about 200,000 and 210,000. Currently, according to the latest statements by an official, 286,000 people are in prisons. This is noted by the latest visit in Silivri prison by the Parliamentary Commission. The inmates, they said, are sleeping in turns. So filled. In those sharing cells, isolated or not, are 135 journalists, some sentenced to aggravated lifetime sentences, such as author Ahmet Altan, whose book, I Will Never See the Light of the Day, I think the correct title, is now nominated in Gifford Prize in the United Kingdom. Politicians like Selahattin Demirtas or Figen Yüksekdağ, former leaders of HDP party, are there. And philanthropists, benevolent businessmen like Osman Kavala are just other examples of twisted justice system, completely tied to the mercy of a single man, President Erdogan. Administrative justice is also subservient to the political executive. In a move that has no place in universal wisdom or practice of democracy, 3 elected Kurdish mayors were brutally replaced by government trustees in Diyarbakir, Mardin, and Van, as also many other Kurdish elected local politicians were removed from the city councils. In short, the judiciary remains tightly subordinated to Erdogan government, which now rules the country more or less from the palace, sidelining in many layers the legislative, the parliament, in which the opposition is stripped of many rights in terms of checks and balances, as the HDP, pro-Kurdish party, is on the edge of facing a closure case, as its deputies have faced daily harassments. Parliament has for long turned into a rubber stamp office. The fact also remains that about 93% of the media has absolutely no editorial independence. It's acting as a mouthpiece for an autocratic rule with massive waves of fake news, lies, and severe disinformation. The public, in general, as a consequence, kept in the dark, as a tiny group of weak alternative print press in Turkey and online news sites struggle to disseminate the truth. These elements combined show a clear-cut case of power grab, which Erdogan has successfully succeeded with through a series of what we can call coups in the past 5 years. It was a series of coups, minor and major. He's more or less in full control of the state institutions, backed by segments of bureaucracy, keen on impunity, continued impunity and arbitrary decisions. He has all the security mechanisms, seemingly, in his grip, lately the army. But, is it really so? That is where I end the bad news side and go to the maybe some things, flickers of hope at the end of the tunnel. We enter a less bleak mark here. Despite the gains of a full-scale one-man rule, the ground on which Erdogan is standing or walking has been showing some interesting cracks lately. The entire opposition owes this not to itself, not to its own existent, non-existent unity, nor to its limited, restricted struggle, but perhaps not strangely enough, Erdogan's own erratic moves were the game changers, and it has led to these erratic moves lately has led to profound corruption and deepening economic quagmire. The currency is devalued more than 40% in a year or so. Unemployment is rising by nearly 60,000 people per month, and it's getting out of control. Growth has slowed down to a standstill, maybe negative, and the recession becomes chronic. Investments have stopped, foreign and domestic confidence is gone, and the source of mine from business lately told me that, quote, everyone now hid their heads behind the trenches, doing nothing, waiting for the man to go. Until then, nothing. If the economy is the prime factor for the slow motion turn, Erdogan's isolation in the palace is the second. His party structures are marred by discontent about him, his own people, which showed clearly in the latest local election results. The AKP, this seemingly invisible giant of Erdogan, lost 6 major cities, greater municipalities, all of them. And this is thanks to the Kurdish tactical vote for the opposition alliance candidates in all of them. And adding to the losses, of course, HDP, pro-Kurdish party, again showed how solid it has been in mainly Kurdish provinces. Then, at that critical moment, Erdogan made another major, perhaps bigger mistake, by denying the result of Istanbul elections, which he had lost only by some 12,000 votes. In an absurd twist, he had the vote annulled and saw himself humiliated again in the repeat elections by 800,000 votes, bringing back Ekrem İmamoğlu, the sort of charismatic leader, candidate of the alliance, opposition alliance of the CHP, as the mayor again. So this is certainly a grand defeat of Erdogan, and it's certainly meaning a rupture point for his rule. And as expected, he's now busy, based on his reflexes of survival, doubling down on oppression measures. So what will happen now? And what do we expect at this current conjunction? Certainly it's a watershed for Turkey, and we are entering a very critical period of deeper uncertainty in the coming months, with all the cards on the table. And there are actually 2 viewpoints, or 2 opposing views of what to expect. The optimistic viewpoint is that Erdogan is finished, as an exaggerated way of putting it. Some columnists viewing this optimistically, seeing that it's the beginning of the end for the rule of Erdogan. And the calculation is that it is the massive bleeding of the AKP party that his chain of erotic moves led to and the corruption thereof. And this will bring about sort of an earthquake from within, which now brings forth two different figures or three different figures from within the party as alternatives. It's important to note that in Turkish water sociology, the massive conservative pious water segments are the defining ones, and they will continue to be the defining ones if or whenever the elections are held in Turkish politics. So whoever gathers and attracts to these pious votes will be the major player in the continued game of Turkey's, very complicated chess game. And these figures are Ali Babacan and Abdullah Gül, who are still waiting and moving slowly ahead, recruiting people, determined to build a party, possibly at the end of this year. Second is a quick runner. He started the race already, Ahmet Davutoğlu, who resigned from the party, former foreign minister and prime minister. And he's busy now launching his party after the resignation, which is, I think, imminent in the coming weeks. And these two figures are to be observed, but particularly Gül and Babacan, because Davutoğlu has a dubious base in the party. And his mistakes, especially in his policies vis-à-vis the Kurdish issue, doesn't make him very popular in those segments. So these calculations that Erdogan has finished is based on this, and also the expectation that the crisis will go very quickly down and help him bring down. And also there are parts of the optimists who tie their hopes to İmamoğlu, and they base their calculations that in 4 years, to 2023 elections, İmamoğlu will be the candidate and challenging Erdogan perhaps in the elections. Another question mark is, of course, if Erdogan will be elected third time or not. Many constitutional experts are arguing that he should not be. This is unconstitutional. But this is Turkey and manipulations country, so anything can happen. Anything could be expected. So this is where we are with the optimistic view. The optimistic view can be over-optimistic because it is 4 years. And there are still those forces or minds in the optimistic segment that still underestimate the abilities, the skills, incredible experiences and skills of Erdogan as a politician and brinksmanship. His brinksmanship is incredible and it's still there. He still may have some cards up his sleeve, and he may prove to be a tough nut to wrestle with. There comes the pessimistic view that given the shaky ground on which the opposition alliance stands, with CHP main opposition, which is many parties within one party like Matrushka babies, and many leader figures acting like the real leader of the party, CHP is still tough puzzle as a player. Where it will stand vis-a-vis the Kurdish issue, nobody knows. So that makes CHP per se as a big continued question mark. Then you have the tiny partner of the opposition alliance, which is İYİ Party, led by Akşener. And this party is an unexpectedly or unpredictable player, let's say, in this game, because latest rumors say that its leadership is in negotiations with Erdogan as entering the government as a third partner. And these rumors are coming from rather reliable sources. So that may also be a game changer in favor of Erdogan, who will do his utmost to stay in power, no matter what. So pessimistic view also says, pessimistic in terms of, those who really want normalization of Turkey, that Erdogan will push, even stretch it further by trying to build a national grand coalition, national unity coalition, perhaps based with Democrats. If the crisis really hits the fan, he will approach all the players with the argument that this is to be or not to be for Turkey. Everyone should extend their hand, and it will be up to them. So we are facing all these options, all the cards open. Then also, as the last one, which is also causing a lot of concern and worry, in Ankara, elsewhere as well, in Washington, in Brussels, that the way the oppression goes on, the way the doubling down goes on, the way the disunity within the opposition goes on, the way the Kurdish issue remains unresolved, and the way to the extent that Turkey becomes ungovernable, another rupture point, not that perhaps a coup, but some sort of sharp rupture point may be also on the table, if things really go the wrong way, keep going the wrong way, the wrongest way. So this is where we are with the political landscape. So as opposed to last year, we were sort of trying to take a snapshot of Turkey, of course, dark Turkey, but a year has passed, and we are looking into an even darker picture at the moment, with a lot more unknowns. This is where I will start. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to continue after this dark picture you drew for us. So Yavuz wanted me to talk about something with a human dimension, and I said, why don't I talk about people who had to leave Turkey, given the circumstances? So to anyone who lives in the UK, the fact that there is a major wave of migration out of Turkey must not come as a surprise. The official numbers estimate that in the last 5 years, close to 20,000 people came to Turkey, and I imagine there are even more people who are here as students, who have not yet settled here.
United Kingdom, not Turkey. You said.
Oh, sorry, United Kingdom. Sorry. So, of course, Turkey has long been a country of immigration, and the UK has long been a destination for 100 years. Even Boris Johnson's great-grandfather, Ali Kemal, fled to England in 1909. But the numbers have increased dramatically in the last few years. So the number of people who leave Turkey are massive. According to official statistics, more than 300,000 people have left. But more than these numbers, what is interesting is who is leaving Turkey and why, and also what is happening to these people. So this has been covered in the major news outlets in the last couple of years: New York Times, BBC, German media. We know that the best educated and the most wealthy groups are leaving Turkey. Most likely the poorer ones and the less educated ones want to leave also, but they are not able to get visas and they don't have the means to leave. So reasons behind it are obviously the economic turndown is a major reason, and the increasing political pressure on all kinds of opposition in Turkey, especially since the 2016 failed military coup attempt. But now even people who have no political problems with the state, if they are not in the inner circle of the palace, want to leave Turkey, even if not for themselves, for the future of their children. They're frustrated by random political persecution, they distrust the judiciary and the arbitrary law, and deterioration of education and business climate and lack of meritocracy are among the reasons why people are leaving. Even though some may interpret the economic and the political motivations of the people who leave Turkey as two separate issues, they are actually the same thing. Or at least they are caused by the same short-sighted decision-making process, mediocrity, nepotism, lack of transparency and accountability is what leads to problems in economy and politics. So Yavuz already talked about the political crisis that pushes people out of Turkey, or at least those who can. He already talked about how 150,000 people have been sacked from their jobs, from public sector employment without an investigation. 50,000 citizens have been detained prior to trial. What is really important in all these cases is that they also have lost the right to seek for their rights. So Hannah Arendt, who wrote about totalitarianism based on the German experience, tells us we cannot determine which right is more important than any other right. One can say, no, this is the right to freedom. One can say the right to education, the right to have access to law, what have you. She says the most important right individuals have is the right to have rights. So when you cannot go and ask, why did I lose my job? Why can't I have another job? My passport is taken from me. On what basis? If you don't have the possibility to ask for these questions, then you have lost your most important right. And this is also what people in the Turkish government have even said. We will subject these people to civil death. We will make them worse than they have died. One public officials have said, let them eat the roots of trees, so that we will not give them anything. We will deny them of all resources. So what does it mean? And what is the difference between really actually pursuing and killing your citizens versus just letting them die and excluding them from all the public life and acting as if they are dead? So this is not something only Turkey is doing. Right now, maybe you're following what is happening in India, in Kashmir. It is being done. China is doing such policies. And also, there are minor examples, like the United Kingdom did that to, if you have followed Begum something, a British citizen joined ISIS, and she lost her citizenship. So after the Second World War, there was this concept that the states cannot make their citizens lose citizenship, and also the states will protect their citizens' citizenship rights. So overall, we are entering a new phase where citizens are denied of their citizenship rights. But Turkey is one of the leaders in this, in the numbers of the persecuted people, the speed at which, and also how fast, for example, it is not only the people who have alleged to have ties to, in creating public unrest, either to Gülen organization or the PKK or other leftist organizations, but also their relatives also lose their passports or under investigation. So by the sheer number and the speed at which this loss of rights is growing, Turkey is leading the race, let's say. Okay, so it is not only people who are at risk who are leaving Turkey, but also people who have money are leaving Turkey. So it is not only judicial unexpectancy or losing the rights, but also the right to keep wealth is also under question. Where do I have the number? In the last few years, according to Financial Times, Turkish government seized worth of $11 billion of assets from nearly 1,000 companies. So this is yet another huge thing that is happening. It is quite rare that governments take over such amounts. Probably the last time it happened, it's during the Armenian genocide and then during the 1955 6-7 September events. Probably are cases where such huge amounts were taken over by the Turkish state. So it really is something. Okay. But at the same time, it is not only people who are persecuted by the state are leaving Turkey, but also there are a lot of people who are just not unsure about what is happening in Turkey, so they're selling everything and moving their families abroad. So it is again reported that at least 12,000 Turkish millionaires and around 12% of the country's wealthy class moved their assets out of the country in 2016 and 2017, according to Global Wealth Migration Review. Most of them moved to Europe and to United Arab Emirates. The report listed Istanbul among 7 cities that experienced an exodus of wealthy people. A newspaper close to government, Sabah, reports that in the last year, 85,000 Turks purchased homes in London at an average price of £1 million. So if anyone wants to get into real estate business, this is the time. So one person bought an apartment worth £100 million in London, another one for £90 million in Knightsbridge. I mean, it is obscene, right, that such apartments exist.
Who is this?
Who are these people? That the names were not listed. Most likely they have a number of houses, right, in other places too. Of course, the consequences of this plight is very sad for Turkey. As the most skilled people are leaving Turkey, and Turkey itself is not investing in education, its population remains lacking skills. OECD conducted a survey of adults in all OECD countries. Turkey ranked the lowest third among 32 countries. So 50% of the 25 to 34-year-olds have not completed secondary education, and 38% have no prior experience with computers. According to the same survey, only 12% of adults have level 3 literacy, which means that individuals can understand and respond to lengthy texts, can identify, interpret, or evaluate one or more pieces of information related to long texts. So it is when we hear that 12% of the wealthiest people are leaving the country, and then the 12% of the people only have level 3 literacy, it says something. But actually only 1% of Turkish adults are proficient at the highest level, which involves problem solving in technology-rich environments. So we can see that 1% really left Turkey. When you meet people in London, they are bankers, people in creative industries, in computer programming, both people who have the technical skills, people who have creative skills. I feel like all actors and actresses are all psychotherapists, all translators, culture producers, journalists, and also academics. Also, the plight of academics would require another talk, but with the being dismissed from Turkey and also no hope of having qualified people to be employed in Turkey, it really is a major lack. So even though there are many universities in Turkey, I would say most much worse than high schools or middle schools, let's say, in this country. So one way to look at it would be to say Turkey's loss is the UK's gain. Actually, the UK affords its austerity measures, let's say in education, thanks to the fact that there are more and more increasingly authoritarian countries whose elite has to leave. There is so much creative energy, so much, let's say, innovation in this country, not because they have been investing in education, but because all the well-educated people of Turkey, also Africa, other Middle East countries, everywhere around the world is coming. So and also all these individuals who find their economies unstable also make massive amounts of money because of this instability, bring and park their money here. So clearly the Tory government sees this as an asset, but it is also a huge loss. Think about the massive amounts of interaction the UK and Turkey could have if those people could stay in Turkey, that if those actresses or psychotherapists or academics didn't have to be turned into waiters and waitresses or taking care of children here, then we could have real interchange and benefit cooperation. Thank you. This is what I was saying.
Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about foreign policy, Turkey's foreign policy in general, but the most burning issue is Syrian problems of Turkey, foreign policy problems of Turkey in Syria. And there's also problems with the European Union, and the Eastern Mediterranean will be done by a very skilled person on this subject, Yannis. If necessary, I may perhaps address the question of Turkey's relation with the European Union at the Q&A part of this panel. Now I'm going to dwell basically on Turkey's policy in Syria, and this question could be separated into two major parts. One is the mistakes that have been done in the past on the Syrian policy. The second one is the mistake which is being done now, still nowadays in Syria. And the second part of this question, that's the mistakes that are being made at present in Syria, are Idlib question on the one hand, and what we call the east of Euphrates River is another question, which is, of course, directly connected to the Turkey's approach to the Kurdish issue in general. First of all, Turkey's Syria policy is a catalogue of mistakes since the day one. And among several alternatives that was on the table of Turkey, Turkey was able to manage to find the worst alternative, which is to the detriment of Turkey. At the beginning, the way it started was that when the Arab Spring broke out in Tunisia, then it jumped to Egypt, then to Libya, then to Syria, and at that time the Tunisian opposition leader, which was based on the Muslim Brotherhood, Ennahda party, led by Mr. Ghannouchi, he feared that the international community was against the Ennahda party, and to dissipate the worries of the international community. They said that when the Muslim Brotherhood supported party comes to power, Tunisia will not go, or a fanatic country will not become a fanatic country. It will not force the ladies to wear scarf. They will not ban alcohol, to serve alcohol in the restaurant, and that they will not impose Sharia in the country. And also, they continue saying that they will be inspired from the AKP party in Turkey with their moderate Islam. Later on, it turned out that they became more moderate and the Turkey became less moderate Islam. So we have to be inspired from Tunisia rather than Tunisia being inspired from Turkey. And at that time, the decision makers in the AKP party, and I'm one of the founding members of the party, but I was expelled from the party later on in 2014 because of my disagreement on foreign policy issues. And the party that I am founder of thought, decision makers of this party thought that when the Muslim Brotherhood minded political party comes to power in Tunisia, then in Egypt, then in Libya, which fell into chaos later on, then in Syria, the decision makers in the AKP party thought that the AKP party is also inspired of the Muslim Brotherhood tradition, because the ancestral mother party, which is Refah Party, which was run by Necmettin Erbakan, that party was inspired from the Muslim Brotherhood traditions, in the sense that Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt was successful, especially in the outskirts of the major agglomeration, big cities, where poor people could be made happy with a small thing, with a small support, by giving them one bag of coal for winter, or one bag of rice to feed their family, or help them in the hospitals, for that type of small things. You could make them happy, and there's a huge democratic potentials in the outskirts of the cities, because the population there is very high. So through this method, you could gain democratic legitimacy in the municipalities. This is how the Muslim Brothers were successful in Egypt, and the Refah Party, the welfare party in Turkey, was inspired from these methods. So the AKP party regarded the Muslim Brotherhood traditions as the source of inspiration for themselves. And now that after the Arab Spring, there was going to emerge a Muslim Brotherhood like-minded parties in these four countries, Turkey being the fifth country and also being inspired from the Muslim Brotherhood traditions. They thought that Turkey would lead this belt of Muslim Brotherhood-minded countries. And this is how they wanted to extend support to Morsi in Egypt, and to Ennahda in Tunisia. But Ennahda transferred the power after 1 year of failure, perhaps, or less of success, absence of success, to another party, Nida Tunis. So there the transmission of power to a more democratic party took place in a democratic manner. In Egypt, it did not take place in a democratic manner because Morsi was ousted. In Syria, this crisis still continues. So Turkey wanted to do something in order to be in line and to lead this Muslim Brotherhood like-minded groups, but it failed. The original mistake in Turkey's policy regarding Syria was that from the day one, it cooperated with the international community to help the armed opposition in Syria, which was repressed by the government and with the disproportionate military use. Later on, the international community became aware that the military support, the weapons, etc., which was being sent to the opposition in Syria, was ending up in the hands of extremist organizations in Syria. So as a result of this, the international community put on brake on their supply of weapons, and Turkey was slow in following suit. It did not perhaps put on brake as the international community has done, and Turkey became, as it was called by the international media, the highway of terrorists towards Syria. And many terrorists from various countries to join the ISIS ranks in Syria, they went through Turkey, and this became, of course, a problem later on for Turkey. Now I would like to jump to the question of Idlib and the Kurdish problem, or east of Euphrates problem. Let me begin with Idlib. In Idlib, it is less a Kurdish problem, but more a problem of Turkey regarding the extremist organizations. In 2017, Syrian government decided to carry out a military operation to eradicate the extremist jihadists from the province of Idlib, and Turkey feared that if such an operation starts by the Syrian authorities, then hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people will move toward the Turkish border, and Turkey will not be able to stop them. And upon this, Turkey asked Russia to tell the Syrian authorities not to carry out this military operation, and they agreed that Turkey will try to persuade the extremist organizations or lesser extremist organizations in Idlib to lay down their arms, and perhaps the pressure upon the Turkish borders will diminish. Turkey promised this. This was in 2017, and by the end of by October 2017, Turkey was going to demilitarize some of the moderate opposition in Idlib. It was not able to achieve this. On the contrary, the most extremist organization, Hayat Tahrir Sham, HTC, HTSS, expanded its zone of influence almost to 90% of the province of Idlib. And now, of course, Russians are still expecting that Turkey will fulfill its promise, but I don't think that will be easy. So perhaps Russia will stop asking the Syrian authorities not to go ahead with clearing the province from the extremist organization, and ultimately Turkey will have to accept this consequence. What Turkey is asking at present from Russia and indirectly from Damascus is that it amounts at least to asking the Damascus authorities to leave these extremist organizations in Idlib and stay there forever. It doesn't make sense because no country would refrain from exterminating their the extremist organization in their country. This is the situation in Idlib, and I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, because Turkey will have to accept sooner or later that Russia plus Damascus authorities will one way or another clean the province from the extremist organization. Now I turn to the east of Euphrates, which is a Kurdish, Syria, Turkey, and American problem. Turkey wants to create safe zones in the east of Euphrates. But the perception of establishing or setting up safe zones in the mind of Turkey is almost diametrically opposed to what the Americans understand from the safe zone. Americans want to set up safe zones to protect Kurds from Turkey, from the Turkey's pressure, whereas Turkey wants to carry out military operations in the east of Euphrates exactly to do the opposite, to crush the Kurdish fighters there. So this is an incompatible situation. So far, America, I think, tries to persuade Turkey to do something much less than what Turkey has in mind. This will continue probably, but the mistake what Turkey has done at the very beginning was that the Syrian Kurds, or YPG, the Democratic Union Party, the biggest Kurdish party in Syria, there were good relations between Turkey and this party. Their leader, Saleh Muslim, was invited to Turkey, and cooperation was proposed by Turkey, but the cooperation, what Turkey understood from the cooperation was that if you declare war to Damascus regime, we are behind you. This is the message that Turkey wanted to give to Saleh Muslim. Saleh Muslim, of course, knowing the balances, the political balances of the power balance within Syria much better than Turkey does, he may have thought that, but what about if the Bashar al-Assad regime survives? Could Turkey save me from the hand of the Bashar al-Assad? It cannot. So he refused to do it. And Turkey, in my opinion, had to continue to cooperate with Saleh Muslim, because the Syrian Kurds, they said loudly that they had nothing to do against Turkey. They were trying to protect or to promote Kurdish cause against the Damascus regime. And they did not have any problem with Turkey, but Turkey regarded them as the continuation of the PKK terrorist organization in Turkey, and for this reason, Turkey does not want to cooperate with the PYD and its military branch, YPG, that's to say People's Protection Units. But I don't think that when America is behind it, it is not easy for Turkey to carry out a military operation that will crush the resistance of the Kurdish fighters of the YPG in the east of Euphrates, and I think Turkey will have to step back again upon the insistence and the resistance by the United States. This is where we stand in the east of Euphrates. So Turkey's policy in all fields are going toward a dead end, and it is very difficult to backstep because Turkey is committed to that extent to do away with the Bashar Assad regime in Syria. Turkey has remained now the only country in the world which does not recognize Bashar Assad as a person who could have a role in the future of Syria. To a certain extent, the United States also believed the same way, but they admitted that any alternative to Bashar Assad is worse than Bashar Assad, so they are going to live with the Bashar Assad solution in Syria, whereas, especially on the Kurdish question in Syria, Turkey and Syria have converging interests. They have to cooperate, and Kurds of the northern Syria should also make part of this cooperation, and the three parties should arrive at a common ground and solve this problem without resorting to arms and without making the situation even more difficult to solve. This is what I have to say at this stage, and perhaps I will come back to the other subjects if there are questions on the European Union and others. Thank you very much.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to speak about Turkey and the region and all the geopolitical risks and all the tensions that are going on right now. And I totally agree with what the minister said. It's a very fair assessment of the situation and how it developed in Syria, as I've also been looking into these matters for the last 10 years. I would just like to add some news that came out today. Mr. Erdogan, in his speech at the United Nations, presented some maps of the safe zones east of Euphrates, saying that there are certain areas designated to build new cities for the refugees, the Syrian refugees that are now in Turkey, to be relocated there under some safe area and under a new regime in northern Syria. But despite this mess that's going on and a deep trouble for Turkey in Syria, there is another, more on the west side of this story, that there is a big turmoil going on right now regarding the Eastern Mediterranean hydrocarbon, let's say, petrodollars, whatever we can call them, which brings Turkey in confrontation with many countries. In Syria, you have Turkey against Assad and maybe a bit about the US, but in Eastern Mediterranean, there is Israel, there is Egypt, there is the Greek Cyprus, there is Greece, there is France, and there's also Italy and the United States via its ExxonMobil company. So it's a multi-layered confrontation there that is coming to a head with the decision of the Turkish government to send second and third exploration and drilling ships in the area. But how did it all start? This is very interesting because, to my assessment, it also has to do with the Muslim Brotherhood roots of the AKP party and government in Turkey. If you can remember, back in 2010, there was that famous flotilla that was supposed to break the embargo of the Gaza embargo from Israel, And it came to a confrontation between Turkey and Israel. Until 2010, the relationship between Turkey and Israel were not very good, but they were not so disastrous as they came out to be after that incident. And the support that the Erdogan governments gave to the Hamas regime in Gaza, that turned Israel from almost neutral player between Turkey and the other countries like Greece and Cyprus in the region to seek alliances and also seek routes to funnel its natural gas findings towards the European markets. If you see where the Leviathan and all the other hydrocarbon findings are taking place, have been found in Eastern Mediterranean, the most logical way, the most cost-effective way to channel them to the markets, to the international markets, and especially Europe, would be to build a pipeline through Turkey, through southern Turkey to northern Turkey, and then maybe combine it with the transatlantic pipeline or even trans-Anatolian pipeline. That would be even the initial research of the Israeli government was to make a pipeline east of Cyprus that would go through Turkey. But the political implications and the confrontation of Erdogan towards Netanyahu and Israel turned Israel to find new solutions. And a new solution was the creation of an alliance initially with Cyprus, and then later with Greece as well, the three-party alliance that has developed since into not only an alliance regarding exploration of natural gas, but also turning into a quasi-military alliance and also a political alliance. And lately, since 2018, the US have committed to become also a 3+1 partner in this alliance. So we see how a shift of policy from the Turkish state towards Israel has created some side effects that have put Turkey on the sidelines of exploration of natural resources in Eastern Mediterranean. Because to my assessment, of course, Turkey should be part of a larger energy cooperation in the region, if everything was reasonable and every party was reasonable. But since there is also the big obstacle of the Greek Cypriot part saying that we will start the exploration of the national resources before the Cyprus issue is resolved, that is a logical argument for the Turkish Cypriot side and Turkey to claim that this is not fair and the Turkish Cypriot people should have a fair share of these resources. The problem is the most valuable parts of these resources are situated on the south and the east of the island. And that makes a real exploration by Turkey very difficult or even economically not viable. But we have to see which international companies would be willing to come into assistance of the Turkish government in order to explore that. Because if you have the Americans, the French, the Italians, and the Israelis on the southern part, then I could see who else would come. Maybe Rosneft said some months ago that they would be willing to go and cooperate, but the Russian gas companies are sanctioned by the West. So this is a very difficult equation to see how it will all play out. But we could find a solution if there would be a breakthrough in the relationships between Turkey and the EU, which is also part of the problem, because if there was let's say, a continuation of the accession talks or a new model of partnership between the EU and Turkey, then potentially there could be a momentum to overcome all these difficult issues in the Eastern Mediterranean and see the bigger picture of having Turkey part of a broader European alliance or Western alliance that would be a benefit to all. The win-win situation that Mr. Erdogan described today in his speech in the United Nations about exploration of these resources could come through the revival of talks between EU and Turkey about becoming real partners again. And what were the problems with these talks? Basically, there were. I say that there were reasons on both sides for the fall of the talks. On the European side, there was also from certain countries the fear of invasion of Turkish workers in their homelands. We can remember Mr. Sarkozy, who was very hostile to the idea of Turkey becoming part of Europe. There were also fears from Eastern European countries that have become hostile to Turkey as well, and the so-called Muslim fear, Islamophobia, which is being cultivated in certain Central or Eastern European countries. And lately, we've seen also in the Brexit discussion how Turkey became part of a fear that Turkish people, Turkish workers will come and invade the British workforce, which is absurd to my knowledge. Maybe it's a chance that if indeed the United Kingdom exits, and all indications show that it will exit the European Union, and maybe hopefully it is associated with a Norway-style agreement with the European Union, then maybe there is also a chance to promote this kind of a solution for the EU-Turkey relationships, because the EFTA, the European Free Trade Association agreement, could include the United Kingdom, Turkey, Norway, Switzerland, and also maybe in the future include also Canada. So it could be a huge economic area that would also put new dimension to the problems, the economic problems that Turkey is facing right now. So we have a situation where Turkey is trying to protect the, let's say, fair rights of the Turkish Cypriot people in Cyprus to have a fair share of the resources there. But on the other hand, it is not viable to what the scientists say and what the oil companies say to have exploitable resources by Turkey in Eastern Mediterranean. So the question arises, will it come to a real crisis that means a military confrontation? Well, I don't think so. I don't think so because, first of all, the Greek Cypriot side has shown restraint in the way that Turkey is exploring in certain areas of the island. That means they understand that this is not a viable way to raise the bar of confrontation. The other element is that if the Turkish government would not, I think my assessment is, would not try and go against Israel and American companies' interests in the region, because that would create some side effects and maybe also implement those sanctions that the Turkish economy could not stand for if they are implemented. And also another factor is we have to see how the American Congress will react to the S-400 issue, because if, as the information comes from Washington, that the Congress will indeed try to impose sanctions, that will be an extra element of destabilization in the relations between the Western Alliance and Turkey. But most of all, what is needed right now, what I think, is a clear answer from the Turkish leadership, whether that is Mr. Erdogan or in the near or far future another one. Is Turkey willing to stay in the Western world, or is Mr. Erdogan trying to seek a third world regime, authoritarian regime, autocratic regime that would fulfill his vision of a country with no, let's say, democratic problems or no opposition problems? I think this is the main dilemma that Turkey is facing right now. Because if there is a build of trust, if in the West the leaders are convinced that Mr. Erdogan and the political leadership of Turkey want to keep Turkey in the Western alliance, then I think much opportunities are still there. Although there are problems, there are still there opportunities to solve this crisis and look for better future and better relations. Thank you.
Discontent at home, Misadventure abroad. Turkey's dual crisis. The title of the panel was touching on the crisis in Turkey in multiple levels. It was former Foreign Minister Yasar Yakis, Chair in Contemporary Turkish Studies and European Institute, London School of Economics and Political Science, Professor Esra Ozyurek, and Yannis Koutsomitis, Managing Editor of Athens-based Kappa News Online, and myself, Yavuz Baydar, who joined the panel. Thank you for listening.